3, 2, week 7. Lucky number, got an amazing event. 5 fights, 5 finishes. Doesn't get a lot better than that. As far as the performances go, I thought this was one of the more just overall entertaining cards to watch. And not to spoil anything, but we saw a lot of contracts handed out, and it all started with a very quick finish, which was kind of the theme of the beginning of this card, as Juan Adams took on Sean Teed, both heavyweights. So you knew there was going to be, or you expected the knockout to come. Juan Adams, man, really just ground and pounded out. Well, he at the beginning of the first round, beginning of the round, he landed some solid punches on the feet, and it seemed like T just never really recovered from that. As it went to the ground, Adams never stopped with the ground and pound, and finally got I think he at one point looked for a rear naked choke, gave up on that, went back for the ground and pound, and just completely dominated Sean Teed. And what was supposed to be, even though the odds, have him as quite a big favorite, this was supposed to be a big test for him. I mean, hasn't been training MMA for a long time. He was only 3-0 coming into this, so one of the more inexperienced fighters on this show, and it wound up not being as close as one would think. I know you tweeted out, Nolan, that you thought it would be a little bit closer. What did this surprise you?
A little bit. I think the matchup that he presents to anybody is a little bit tricky at times. He's a ground fighter at the heavyweight level, or the heavyweight division, which is a little unusual. But yeah, man, Adams went out there and he really impressed me. I know a lot of people were saying they thought he was really green. I actually think in terms of heavyweight development, I think he's at the UFC level. Sure, there's some instances or some aspects of his game. There's been some instances in fights that we've seen where he needs to improve aspects of his game. His last LFA fight, there was some, he was kind of lethargic, too laid back, ended up not having as impressive of a decision as he probably could have, or impressive as a performance as he probably could have. But I felt like he shook those cobwebs away for this fight, went out there, took on Sean Teed, was even willing to engage with Sean Teed on the ground. A lot of people don't know. They see a heavyweight, they're like, oh, he's on his back, he's not going to do very well here. Adams is definitely in the dominant position. And it did appear that way tonight, but Sean Teed has pulled off submissions off of his back. He's very skilled on the ground, has a wrestling and jiu-jitsu background, and that's kind of his wheelhouse. So for Adams to go in there and not only engage him on the feet, which we all knew he was going to do, but also be willing to just, willing to go right into Teed's guard when Teed pulled guard and just punish him was impressive. I think he's a good addition to the UFC's heavyweight division. He's young, he's got charisma, he's got the it factor. Massive human being who weighs around 300 pounds when he walks around. So I think the signing was great. I don't think there's much else that the regional scene could have provided for Adams. I think that's a big part of it too. With the lighter weight guys, they might look green, but you got to also weigh the fact that this is a heavyweight fighter and there's not much other. You can't, Sean Teed's a very tough fighter. He's arguably the best heavyweight in CFFC, which is a very good promotion. And Adams went out there and just dominated him. So where else is he going to go from there? Is he going to beat another region's heavyweight champ? Like, what's he going to do? So I'm fine with it. I was really happy with the performance that Adams put on tonight, and I'm super, super excited for his UFC debut whenever that may be.
I saw some people giving Adams some backlash for his interview, where I just thought he was showing off some personality. He did take some digs at Teed. I thought there was some gold dropped in that, though. Saying he had a dad bod and then pointing at himself. Something about Teed eating barbecue, or I couldn't pick it all up, but there was a lot of good lines in there. I thought it was cool, and then a lot of other people were outraged, but we kind of live, in times where people like to be outraged. So I don't know, how much of that was I mean, the the disrespecting your opponent thing, I can kind of understand. But then again, we've had guys like McGregor say that they're gonna go into Jose Aldo's village and basically enslave all the people there, and anyone who couldn't be this good enough to be a slave was going to be murdered. So, not really sure we have the moral high ground here at all.
Yeah, and I completely agree with you. I'm kind of on the fence about it. Like, I see both sides. I think on one hand, Adams, if you listen to him talk in interviews, if you listen to him in his past post-fight interviews, very smart guy. He's definitely got the WWE mic skills that he put into he tried out for WWE at one point. So he's got that all going for him. I definitely do see in terms of what you just mentioned, the level of disrespecting a guy that you didn't really have bad blood with after you already beat him up pretty badly. So I understand both sides of it. I wasn't necessarily bothered by it one way or another, just because I feel like I'm more familiar with Adams and I know what he was trying to do and where he was coming from. But yeah, I see both sides of the fence. I'm just kind of, a lot of times I have an opinion on certain things, and then other times I just don't have an opinion. And I feel like I'm so neutral on this that I've already wasted enough time thinking about it in my head.
Yeah, it's just kind of pick what you want. Do you want guys with personality? Do you want boring guys? I think some people jump back and forth between, be a little bipolar about the kind of fighter that they want to watch. Anyway, moving on to the second fight, we had Maurice Mitchell and Jordan Griffin, and we went from heavyweights down all the way down to bantamweights, featherweights. Maurice Mitchell, the Alaskan FC champ, had a pretty sparkling record coming in, but as we talk about on this show quite a bit, quality of opponent.
Can I call a timeout really quick? We have a question in the chat from Sean Bitter.
Okay.
He's asking who we would match Juan Adams up with in his UFC debut.
Is that for me, or are you supposed
to? Either one of us. I mean, I was going to let be courteous and let my guest go first, but I guess
okay. Who is? Let's think.
I know a lot of people were saying the Greg Hardy thing, and I'm kind of not a fan of that necessarily. I don't think it makes much sense. If Hardy were to win next week and they sign him, they should have those two fight. I get it on one hand because there's not a lot of fighters with 4 fights or less in the UFC. They're both relatively inexperienced at heavyweight, but I really think there's better matchups for them. Give them a guy that's a little more seasoned, a veteran, a guy that might have a little bit of a higher IQ than them, but maybe not the skills. Give them something to challenge them, to be able to not have some type of devastating loss in their UFC debut. Then again, if they did match them up, I would totally watch it. So.
But let's think about who else has been signed from Contender Series that was a heavyweight.
Yeah.
And worked from that.
I think the only one last year was Crowder.
Crowder. Okay. I'm down with that.
Yeah. That would be a guy that I would maybe look at if we wanted to do Contender Series versus Contender Series. But there's some other guys that I feel like, especially some fighters from overseas that have just been hanging around. There's Dmitry Smolyakov, who's winless in the UFC. I'm sure, I thought he was going to be cut, but he seems like he's hanging around. So maybe he's a guy that you could give to either one of these guys. Sean Bitter says Daniel Spitz. That's not a bad idea. Somebody like that. So I'm cool with whatever. Honestly, just don't rush. They have a tendency sometimes sometimes they pamper prospects and sometimes they rush them. And I feel like we never really get a middle ground. So I'd like to see some more gradual succession up the ladder before we start feeding these guys anybody of significant note or somebody that's also surging.
I feel like Sean should be on this podcast.
Yeah. Sean needs to make an on-screen appearance.
He's hiding from us. But, we were about to move on, but something that popped in my head when we were talking, with Juan Adams and him being so inexperienced. I remember now at the time I was thinking that he was a lock for one of those, either the development deal or what they did with I'm not going to remember his name, but earlier in the season where they said he was going to go on to the Ultimate Fighter. I thought maybe that would be the route that would. I don't know if the Ultimate Fighter has started already though. But I thought either development deal or Ultimate Fighter would.
You talking about Parisian? Who are you talking about?
The guy from earlier in this season of
Parisian, Josh Parisian.
Yeah. They had him go to the Ultimate Fighter, and with Juan Adams being so inexperienced, I thought, okay, he's a lock for the development deal or Ultimate Fighter.
Yeah, I think part of the problem too is that the Ultimate Fighter's already in filming.
Okay, yeah, that's what I didn't know. I was so that clears that up. Still surprised he didn't get development deal and instead gets the straight. We're giving it away. It's straight UFC contract here, but we will, of course, get to the White decision at the end of the show. But moving on to the featherweights, we had the Alaskan FC champ, Maurice Mitchell. Like I said, quality opponents was a question. Jordan Griffin, on the other hand, a little bit more experience. Has been around. Definitely seen some things. Was the LFA? Was he? Did he ever become a champion in LFA, or was he just an LFA?
No, he's just an LFA fighter. I think he had to go back and look, but I think he only had a few appearances for them, maybe even one.
But a 22-fight veteran, a pro fight veteran, out of Rufus Sport, you knew this dude was going to be tough. And the big question with Mitchell, on the other hand, was, like I said, the quality of opponents. Mitchell gets caught early, actually gets his mouthpiece knocked out. And then at one point, it looked like Mitchell was going to submit Griffin, and then he winds up getting submitted actually with the rear naked choke in the first round. So back-to-back first-round finishes. We talk about quality opponent on here a lot. How much did that factor into what you were thinking, how this fight was going to play out coming into it?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, looking at the performance as a whole, there's going to be two fights on this card. We'll get to one later, but the second one is this fight where I felt that the fighter who lost, if I was scouting Jordan Griffin, I was scouting Maurice Mitchell, the idea that the level I thought the two fighters were going to be at, Griffin lived up to the level I thought he was going to be at, and I think Mitchell honestly exceeded it. I was expecting him to look a lot worse just because of the competition he was fighting. Again, something we've talked about quite a bit extensively on this card, on this podcast. And I honestly thought he looked pretty good. He moved up a weight class to fight a really tough guy who's only really lost to MMA notables, UFC veterans, Bellator surging prospect Juan Archuleta. Like, Jordan Griffin's resume is very legit. He's got over 20 fights. And more, he was jumping in with these sneaky punches and connecting on Griffin's face. I think Griffin even said in the post-fight interview that he saw double at one point towards the end of the fight, actually, for the finish. So Mitchell was showing some stuff in there. He's not a big 140. He's not a huge 135er by any means in terms of the weight he cuts. He's got a pretty comfortable cut to 135. So for him to move up a weight class and to have that success, I think Maurice Mitchell's stock raised up a little bit, in my opinion, despite, again, this is, we've talked about it before, it's an assumption I'm making that maybe it's not always accurate. Just because he's faced guys that are considered jobbers or cans or whatever derogatory term you want to use for somebody that would totally kick either one of our asses, whatever term you want to use, Maurice Mitchell also has skills. He could have fought good fighters and beat them. We just didn't know that. So I thought he had a good performance, and I thought Griffin showed some heart. He came back, from getting apparently rocked and got that exciting finish, and ultimately it was enough.
Yeah, Mitchell training out of Team Alpha Male is gonna be around some tough dudes as well. So no surprise that he showed some toughness in his fight. Another first-round finish. So we move on. Middleweights. This was one I was I was really excited for. Ian Hennish taking on Justin Sumner. Justin, a teammate of Nick Newell, fought on last week's card. And this one, Hennish just showed off kind of I think, a superior ground game. At one point, made some mistakes going for some risky submissions, and Sumter actually took his back, but Hennish was able to, flip that around, get on top into side controller at guard, and land some nasty elbows that just took Sumter out, man. Just vicious elbows, reminiscent of Curtis Blades. What did you? Was this kind of? I mean, this was one of the more lopsided odds. At least for the odds makers, they had this as one of the more lopsided bouts. Was this what you were expecting to see? And what do you think the ceiling is on Hennish? I know a lot of people are super high on him now after this performance.
Yeah, I mean, I was super high on him before this performance. I'm getting in early. I'm like a hipster. I get in before everybody else. I'm a prospect hipster. So Ian Heinisch is a guy who he's had like a double dose of experience on the regional scene. He was one fight away from the UFC, lost for the vacant belt against Marcus Perez, who later was signed to the UFC. So he had to go back, work his way up again in LFA to the point of winning an interim title. I know it was only a few fights, but those few fights are very valuable, in terms of experience, in terms of fighting other top-level competition before you get to the UFC. So I honestly think having to take his mulligan honestly helped him. He looked great in this fight. I mean, I say he looked great, but I also think Justin Sumter looked fairly good. I wasn't really sure what to expect out of him, even though he's a New England guy. His fights have always been kind of weird, like the matchmaking and stuff, and it's been kind of hard to get a read on exactly how good he was. I think something that I talked to him about before the fight in the interview for MMA Today was getting tested. He was saying he's so happy about this fight because he's able to he would have been able to not only prove to himself that he was, or not only prove to others that he was as good as he knew he was, but he was also going to be able to prove it to himself for once because he felt like he had never really been tested. So we got to see Justin Sumter tested. He did have some success against a really tough fighter. Ultimately, he got knocked out pretty brutally. But I think both guys have bright futures. It's just Ian Heinisch is his future is now. So we'll see Justin Sumter. He'll go back to the regional scene. I'm sure he'll take some fights for CES and whatnot. Maybe we'll see him on a Contender Series next year or something. But Ian Heinisch is the real deal. I think he's, forgetting about the performances on the show. If I were to do a scouting report on every fighter that was featured on this season, he would be one of the guys towards the top that I would think I think so highly of him. So I'm super stoked to see his UFC debut, and I'm not trying to spoil anything too. I have a tendency to spoil like every fight we talk about, but I just need to give my 2 cents on the future, and I think his future's bright.
For sure, yeah. And so from there, went back to heavyweight. At this point, we've had 3 straight first-round finishes. The night is cruising along, crazy fast. We're already to the 4th fight of the night. Dontel Mays taking on Mitchell Sipe. Apparently, that's how you pronounce his last name. That's how they're pronouncing it on the
broadcast. We struggled last week with that.
What isn't his nickname No Dice though? So
yeah, well, it was. Now, he changed it to Sniper. I don't know if you noticed that
nickname. I didn't get that. No.
What's that?
I didn't see the nickname change.
Yeah, when I was talking to him, interviewing him for MMA Today, he was like, "Oh, you work for Tapology? You need to change my nickname. It's not No Dice anymore." So I'll never forget what his nickname is, but I guess Sniper and Sipe kind of sound similar in the same category as Dice. So it's not Sipe. It's not.
Sipe. They don't. I don't think they go.
What?
Dice and Sipe?
I mean, they kind of have the I sound. All right. Anyways, our rhyming podcast can be next week.
I'll let you recap this fight. How about that?
Yeah. So, I mean, this one was one of those fights where the skills that were on display weren't necessarily the highest level, but it was super fucking exciting to watch. Like, it's one of those, everybody kind of wants to say something about, oh, these guys are sloppy or they're just winging punches. At the same time, you're sitting on your couch. You're sitting closest to the edge of your couch possible watching these two throw down. I mean, they were literally just throwing their bodies at each other. They were headbutting each other and just bashing into each other. At one point, Mays went for some type of wild like flying switch kick thing, and Sipe took him down. I honestly really thoroughly enjoyed this fight, and this was the second fight I was talking about where I felt like the loser honestly showed me more a higher ability than I thought the winner did for me in relativity to what I was expecting. I thought Sipe, for a guy who's only 22 years old, to go out there and put on a performance against one of the arguably top 5 heavyweights and prospects in North America was extremely impressive. And I think, again, it kind of goes to show you what the expectations are for the heavyweight division. I saw a lot of people kind of saying, oh, Mays isn't that great, kind of same thought process as, oh, Adams is really green. Like, it's just kind of the way the heavyweight division is now. Like, these guys are really good, even though it might seem like they're a little bit, the little regressed compared to the other divisions that are getting signed. But it's just the state of the way things are. So, for Sipe to go out there and put on a solid performance, and, in my book, he was winning up until the end, where Don'Tale Mayes, was able to land a nice vicious little elbow, split Sipe open in made this one of the bloodiest fights in Tuesday Night Contender Series history. Ultimately got him down and was able to secure a TKO. But what did you think of all the blood, man? It looked like the Kool-Aid man got in a car accident.
I fucking loved it. I wanted to like lick my TV screen. I was digging it.
Style.
Yeah, like there was just so much blood, and like when they went to go look at his forehead, and like literally like kind of like squirt, like some just like squirted out,
Yeah.
I was like, fuck yeah, like this guy.
I think the pools on the ground were like, we've seen bloody fights, but usually they kind of like move around enough where the blood just kind of goes everywhere. But this was like, there was one point where he lifted his head up and it was just a straight puddle, dude. It was like, the puddle that forms near like the gutter on the drain pipe on the street, man. It was nasty. It was, but in a good way.
I thought you would like it. You're the EMT. I thought you're. I mean, don't you kind of have to be into that stuff?
I mean, I like it in the fact that I'm not the one that has to clean it up.
Yeah, I guess, but I would just think you'd be more conditioned to the blood. I mean, I love those bloody fights. I thought Mays, like you said, it's heavyweight. If you're expecting 2 extremely skilled fighters at 265 in a more non-UFC level, it's not going to happen. Basically, these guys all have stuff they need to work on. That works in progress, project type fighters. So, I'm sure we'll see Don'Tale Mayes back on Contender Series at some point.
Got some breaking news on my phone.
Oh yeah.
UFC Sao Paulo. Andre Ewell, the CES bantamweight champion, will be making his debut against former UFC champion Renan Barão. So that's kind of interesting.
What was the match? That's a headlining, you said?
No. It's just on the card.
What was it again?
Which actually, it looks like Combate just put it up too, so that's great. But Combate has it up actually now. Rafael Marino must be on the same chain email that I am, chain text message, because Andre Ewell, Ewell, will be taking on Renan Barão at UFC Sao Paulo.
Wow, we haven't seen Barão. That's interesting. Yeah, like that.
But anyways, where are we going with this?
So, like I was saying, heavyweight. Maybe we'll probably see both these guys back. Neither of them had a lot of experience coming into this. Mays had 6 fights. Sipe only had 4 fights. So, not a lot of experience between these two. A lot of growing to do, growing pains, whatnot. I'm sure we'll see them back, right?
Yeah, absolutely, man. I'm sure Mays is kind of I view him almost as a project at this point, not in a bad way. I just view him as somebody that he's going to need to make a lot of adjustments and gain more experience. Because to be honest, he came on Contender Series last year. He only had, I think he was 3-2 or something. No, he was 3-1, something like that. So not a lot of experience. So he's just a guy. He's got really good boxing foundations. He's willing to mix it up, be funky, throw angles, stuff like that. But I think he's going to need to go back to the drawing board and have a few more fights and pull out a few more wins like this where, you know, if he went out there and he got a knockout in the first round, we would think the world of him, but he would still have these holes. Like, it only takes one punch for these fights to end. You got to remember. So for Mays to be able to have this tape, to go back and have a tough fight like this, it really shows him, I think, what he needs to improve on. So he's got some great management. He's got a good team around him. He's got a good boxing foundation. So I think that he'll go back to the drawing board and we'll see him better than ever. But I expect him sometime down the line to be in the UFC. He just needs more fights.
For sure, yeah. And so that was another finish. We're on our fourth straight finish. This one was not in the first round; it was in the second round. You know, and then we move on to the main event: Roosevelt Roberts, Garrett Gross. You know, this was lightweight, a very tough division to crack into, as everybody knows. You know, I'll let you break this one down because I don't want to just say it was a dominant performance from Roberts. I'm sure there was some more intricacy to it, but my attention was kind of split between multiple things at once. So I really wasn't able to give this fight the full attention. So why don't you break this one down?
Sure. So Roosevelt Roberts comes into this fight as a relative unknown. We really don't know who he is. There's not much tape. He actually told me that Sean Shelby asked – there's a few guys that I talked to that said there's some of the more unknown fighters this season where Sean Shelby – couldn't even really find tape on him outside of his amateur career, just like the scouts and the fans and the journalists. So he actually had Roberts go to the promotions and send tapes in to Shelby so that he could see him fight. And apparently they like what they saw. That was the right decision because he went out there, he fought a guy in Garrett Gross, really experienced fighter, a guy that's turned things around recently, started off his career at 1-3. Since then, now I think he's 11-7. He was winning 4 fights or he's 11-8 now. 11-7 going into this fight. Has won 4 fights in a row since moving down to lightweight. Moving down to lightweight. And so Roberts just went out there, man, and he just manhandled him. He showed that I think it was a perfect matchmaking for him. Maybe it wasn't the sexiest Contender Series performance in terms of like, you know, going out there and getting some type of explosive finish or really putting on a phenomenal striking display. But he really went out there and just took down Gross over and over again, showed some great wrestling abilities, some great fight IQ. I thought Gross still looked a little rough around the edges in terms of the decisions that he made. He was sticking his head into submissions a lot. But yeah, it was literally from beginning to end, with the exception of a small flurry at the beginning of the second round by Gross. It was all Roosevelt Roberts. I think he was on the cusp. When I was reflecting on this fight after he pulled off a second round submission over Gross, I should mention, I was reflecting on the fact that I wasn't really sure. He was kind of on the line for me in terms of going to the UFC or getting a developmental deal. I think most people that I was reading on Twitter thought he should get the UFC deal. I wouldn't have minded seeing him get a developmental deal because I think his foundations are really strong. I think his level of opposition tonight wasn't necessarily top tier. Against a really tough regional veteran who's on a win streak. So I'm okay with the UFC contract. I just think there are some things that we've yet to see out of him. I think he's young in the sport still. He hasn't been doing this that long. And honestly, you know, the more I think about it, the more I'm okay with him getting the UFC contract. And I'm just overall it put a good stamp on another episode of Contender Series.
Yeah, like you said, not exactly anything flashy, but you could just tell this was a guy who went out there and took down, you know, the more experienced guy and imposed his will. It's going to sound cliche, but I mean, if you watch the fight, you know, it was really just him being in control from start to finish, and really, you know, cruising, basically, I guess you could say. So that takes us to, you know, we had 5 finishes. A lot of people were saying, oh, Dana White's got to give out 3 contracts tonight. You know, we've had 5 finishes, 5 great fights, 5 fighters who've looked, you know, pretty good. I think Mays was the one guy people were a little bit, you know, iffy on. And then, you know, Dana comes out and does the whole, you know, I'm going to sign this guy, and then, oh, yeah, I'm gonna go against my matchmakers again and sign a fourth guy. So we got 4 contracts. Those, of course, were Roosevelt, Roberts, who we just talked about, Hennish, Griffin, and Adams. All straight UFC contracts, no developmental deals, no Ultimate Fighter, none of that, just straight UFC contracts. Were you surprised that he handed out that many contracts and there was no development deals or anything?
I mean, honestly, like, if this were to have been episode 1, I would have been surprised. But the fact that it's episode 7, we've seen Dana be super generous. And I don't mean that they're not deserved. I just mean in terms of he's given out way more contracts this season than he has last season. He seems to recognize the fact that a lot of these guys, I think, are going to get signed off Contender Series anyway. So why not make a little bit more of a spectacle out of it instead of picking 1 or 2 guys? Why not give it to everybody that had a UFC level performance that night? So that's what he's doing. I wasn't surprised, and I was totally okay with it. I mean, this is the second time this week he's done for it. It sucks for the one guy that wins and doesn't get a contract, but at the same time, I think he made the right call, the white decision. So, Roberts, I was in the end cool with him getting the contract. Adams, I was super into him getting the contract. I think I was swimming upstream on that one. And then, Griffin had a good comeback performance, so I was good with that. And then Ian Heinisch, most deserving fighter on this card if we're talking about their credentials coming into it. So totally cool with it. I think that the decision, they've done a good job all season. I can't really think if there's been a decision where I've been like, damn, they should have signed that guy. They've done a good job all season with it. Well, Chris Curtis, that was the only one.
Yeah.
They seem to learn from their week 1 mistake.
So I personally, I really wanted to sign Juan Adams. I didn't like the backlash he was getting from fans. So and I'm that guy. If somebody's not like, yeah, that too. But it's like if the fan base is going one direction, I want to go the other. Like, I'm contrarian, And so if I see people pushing back against Juan Adams, like, this guy was disrespectful, like, he's not ready or whatever, then I'm gonna be like, sign that guy. I don't know. I just like this personality too, and he's totally cemented that in his what are we calling these now? Post-contract interviews?
Yeah,
I guess where he said he was gonna go. His 2 favorite things are Taco Bell and drinking, and they had the Taco Bell cantinas where they sell alcohol, in Vegas.
Yeah.
So kind of cemented him as one of my new favorite heavyweights. And when I say that, I don't really root for anybody. So I'm just saying I like his personality and whatnot. But that was the guy. So I selfishly wanted them to sign, but I honestly thought that he would get a developmental deal. So I was surprised. I was a little surprised. Unlike you, I was surprised by that. I was
actually surprised too. Like, I thought it was one of those things where I'm measuring, like, I'm like, oh, I'm smarter than the UFC. Like, they should do this, but I know they're going to do that. And then they actually were on the same page with me. So I guess I'm not as smart as I think I am.
But I definitely agree with you. Hennish was the most deserving of this card. Obviously it sucks for Mays sitting back there. He's the only guy not to get a UFC contract. Brief shot of him sitting all by himself. Heartbreaking, definitely. But 4 guys going to the UFC. All excited to see where they go. I think in the last few weeks we've been kind of doing matchmaker. We already did that with the Juan Adams fight. So let's do the other 3 that got signed. And start with Jordan Griffin. Who should he be fighting in his first UFC fight?
You're gonna hit me with the featherweights, man. This is like
that's tough. It's a really deep division.
Let's see. Let me get my roster up here, but off the top of my head, again, I don't find there to be any reason to rush these guys. Man, the UFC has a lot of fighters, huh? How about a guy like Steven Peterson? Like, he just had the win over Matt Bessette. That might be a good pick. Maybe like a Brandon Davis or even a Brad Katona. There's a lot of options at featherweight. There's a lot of new signees, so I'm cool with any of those.
Yeah, I want to see someone who's going to test his striking, and a couple of those guys you named definitely fit that bill. Brendan Davis for sure. That'd be interesting. And then I'll start off with Hennish. He called out all the middleweights who made it off Contender Series, which our own trademark MMA Max Friedman, I guess.
I guess that's his name.
That's his name.
That guy.
It's weird.
Whatever his name is.
It's weird because we all have like I don't know.
I know.
Twitter handle or their real name, but he listed off the middleweights that have made it from Contender Series, and it's quite the list of killers. So it's interesting that Hennish called them all out. We got Bevon Lewis, Anthony Hernandez, Edmund Shabazian, which was just earlier this season, the Ronda Rousey guy, and then we had Julian Marquez, who of course has had some pretty spectacular fights on the Contender Series and UFC, and Charles Bird, who's had some success as well. So I don't know. Who would you match him up out of those?
I like the Julian Marquez matchup, but I think Marquez just had surgery, so I think he's going to be out for a while. Maybe if the surgery has a short recovery time, I'd be totally down for that one. If not, I think Charles Bird would be a good option, but I think he's fighting in Dallas, I believe, on the 228 card. So unless I'm mistaken, he might be also out of the picture for – yeah, he's fighting Darren Stewart, so he's out of the picture. So it would have to be an Anthony Hernandez or Bevon Lewis or wait for Julian Marquez. Or who was the other one?
Of the guys who made it out of 185 was Lewis, Anthony Hernandez,
yeah,
and Shabazian.
Oh, Shabazian. Yeah, I mean, Shabazian would be an interesting one. I think Heinisch would kind of be a little bit too much for him, but we've never seen him tested, Shabazian. So, yeah, Shabazian or Julian Marquez, if he's ready, I'd be down for.
For sure. And then obviously, the next one is going to be another deep division, lightweight, Roosevelt Roberts. Just like featherweight, really hard to find, break into.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, looking at it, the guys that have had one or two fights in the UFC, we got Mike Trezano, Joe Giannetti, Alan Zuniga, John Gunther, Luis Pena, Dan Morat. Maybe a Dan Morat would be a good one. I don't know. That sounds like a good fight.
I think he actually called out Trezano.
So, he did call out Trezano in the post-fight interview.
So if he's going to be,
Luis Pena also called out Mike Trezano. So Mike Trezano is a wanted man.
Wow. Okay. Well, apparently they were I forget. Was Violent Bob Ross and him opposing teammates, or were they teammates? I don't know.
Pena was on Team DC. Mike Trezano, I'm not sure. I can look real quick, but I think Pena wants to obviously fight Trezano because he feels like he never got his fair shot in the tournament. But like they were not teammates; they were on opposite teams on Tough, so that would work out.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So I don't know. Roberts, obviously, just dominant in this performance. So excited to see his next. I'm excited to see where all four of these guys, who they wind up fighting in the UFC. And that pretty much wraps up this crazy card. Second to last card. Next week's going to be our last one. I know this has been, probably one of the more popular YouTube, at least podcasts. I shouldn't say YouTube, but podcasts. The MMA Today pods has. So we'll definitely look to try to fill that void somehow when the Contender Series is over, or whether it be, covering regional stuff like LFA, CES. Obviously, no one is out in Boston area, so a lot of CES activity out there. But we'll definitely look to bring you guys more content from, some void that's not being filled at the moment by the mainstream MMA. But we really appreciate all the support, all the views, likes, sharing our stuff.
Yeah, couldn't have said it better myself, man. I'm super appreciative of everybody that does tune in or gives us comments or likes or favorites or retweets. We don't take it for granted, and I think something MMA Today. We're really happy with the direction that it's going in, and overall, I think within like past year. I mean, I was looking at my Twitter feed today. I only joined up with MMA Today, I think 14 months ago, something like that. So it's been quite a ride so far, and John Franklin's doing a great job with the podcast network. And this is just one of the many shows that we offer, and we got one more episode in the books, and we're going to have one more episode next week. So it's not over yet. We're not saying goodbye yet.
Yeah, well, we'll figure something out. You would assume it would probably be something to do with regional MMA, though.
Yeah.
But we'll definitely be back. We're not going to be leaving you guys for good. On that note, though, it is the last Contender Series episode next week. Sad face emoji. Let's preview that last one and try not to be too sad.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So yeah, the last one, we got 5 more fights on Contender Series. We have a light heavyweight matchup, a heavyweight matchup, a featherweight matchup, a lightweight matchup, and another featherweight matchup. So we have Kennedy and Chukwu, who was on Contender Series last year. Big, tall, rangy guy. I think he headlined the last episode or second to last episode. He picked up the win, didn't get the contract, looked very green. Well, he went back to the regional scene, went to LFA, picked up I think he picked up a victory in Brave FC or CF, and then picked up a victory for LFA. He's taking on Dennis Bryant, another Alaska FC champion, their light heavyweight champion. So that will be an interesting fight. We've got J.R. Coffrin versus Alex Gilpin. Gilpin is a really good prospect. I had him in one of my prospect reports for Flow Combat a while back. I think he ended up electing to sign with ACB on a one-fight deal, went over there, picked up a victory for them against Adlan Mamayev, who was an undefeated Russian fighter. So it's 11-1 versus 6-0 in J.R. Coffrin, another really good, talented fighter out of Oklahoma. So that's going to be good. Then we have Jacob Kilburn versus Bobby Moffitt. Bobby Moffitt signed off of Dana White's looking for a fight. Jacob Kilburn, an Island Fights guy who was originally scheduled to fight Max Mustaki. Mustaki was signed to Contender Series. Kilburn fought a replacement opponent on that card, won. Now he's got his shot at the Contender Series. We have 2 more fights. Joseph Lowry versus Devontae Smith is an absolute sick fight. King Cage, Devontae Smith, a guy that was a shoo-in, in my opinion, for Contender Series. And as the fights got announced, the events got announced, I was a little concerned that he wasn't going to be able to make it onto the Contender Series, but they did the right thing and they signed him. He's fighting Joseph Lowry, also off of Dana White's looking for a fight, one of the best prospects in the Northeast from the New Jersey, Philadelphia circuit. Going to be super, super good fight. I'm super stoked for that one. And then the main event, heavyweights, Greg Hardy versus Tavares Boom Gordon. Gordon's got 3 fights, a little bit of an undersized heavyweight, which doesn't really doesn't bode well for him against the Hulk that is Greg Hardy. But this is another opportunity for Greg Hardy to put an undefeated fighter on his resume. And there's a big difference between 1-0 and 2-0. So there's a huge possibility that the UFC picks him up if he gets this first round knockout again. So super stoked for this one. We're going to go out with a bang no matter what. I don't see any of these fights necessarily being bad. So that will be the way that we conclude our Contender Series Season 2.
Yeah, I'm super psyched on that Bobby Moffitt fight. I've seen him in LFA. He's been around for quite a bit. And then obviously on the looking for a fight, impressed. Devontae Smith, another name that I think jumped out at me when I saw this upcoming week. And then what was the other guy besides the guy with the hard to pronounce name?
Chukwu?
Yeah, him. I had seen him in LFA as well. Excited to see those guys. And then obviously that main event, killer main event, Greg Hardy. From what I saw in Tavares Gordon, I think this is a very tough matchup for him. Kind of one of those heavyweights who a lot of the weight is, he's got the Derek Lewis body type, I guess you could say. And Greg Hardy's just a mammoth of a man. So I don't know. We talked about this one before, where we think this is kind of the UFC making sure Hardy gets another big KO and earns that UFC contract. But at least in my mind, Greg Hardy gets that win. Dana White will be He'll be on as crazy as it sounds, we'll be seeing Greg Hardy on like an actual UFC show, I think, by the end of 2018.
And I honestly, if he goes out there and does pick up a first-round victory, like I do feel like Tavares Gordon, they are throwing him to the wolves a little bit here. But if he was on the regional scene and he went and he was, touring around the U.S. and regional scenes, and he went and he beat Austin Lane, and he beat Tavares Gordon, like those are two solid wins. There is a level above that you could fight on the regional scene, like a Jeff Hughes or somebody like that, or Greg Rebello. But honestly, man, that's like, that's a pretty. Those are two solid wins to have on your resume as a heavyweight right now. And I wouldn't be I don't want to speak too soon, but if he does get that first round knockout, I can't really argue about his merit in being in the UFC, skill wise, because the guy's presenting things that we haven't seen before, at least up until this point.
Yeah, like I've said before, the only guy I think you can match up athletically wise is John Jones, whose brother, of course, was, comes from a family whose brothers are NFL players.
Did you see Chandler Jones's video the other day?
Yeah, he literally took off the pad or took down the entire what do you call those? The
block. I know I should know this, but basically the dummies, like the lineup of, they're all lined up on like a metal pole, and the lineman hit them. Just knocked his right over backwards.
Yeah, you're supposed to hit it really hard, and then he hit it so hard that it literally flew off. He's apparently been hanging out with training some MMA with John Jones or something, man. Like, brother.
Scary.
Yeah, scary power. So that's kind of, when we speak of athletes, like John Jones is just really the only athlete we've had of that caliber, and that's no disrespect to, former UFC fighters, current UFC fighters. It's just, I guess my analogy would be like, soccer in the U.S. Like our best talented guys, they don't go play soccer. That's why we don't win the World Cup. That's why we didn't even make the World Cup last year. It's because our best athletes, they go play in the NBA, they go play baseball. They play NFL, all those big three sports, and so the talent pool is just smaller.
Yeah.
So when you get these crazy athletes like Greg Hardy at this level, some amazing things can happen.
Plus, he's in his prime too, which is something, like we don't. I don't know. There's not many NFLers that have circumstances that led them to be athletically in their prime, but not on a football team. When you're like a pro
guys, there'll be guys who are really fringe NFL players like
Mitrione, Schaub,
guys that really just I don't think played at all, or if any at all, real minutes in the NFL. So it's just levels to this stuff, and the level of athlete. We might not see it again, So while he's here, watch him and don't take him for granted, basically.
Absolutely.
But that'll wrap up.
We pretty much have going, right?
Yeah, I'll wrap up week 7, or episode 7, week 7 of Contender Series, and we'll see you guys back here next week for the last episode of Contender Series.
Peace
out, guys.